You do not arrive at a place like this in chains. You arrive with a suitcase and a story that has been rewritten just enough to make what is about to happen sound reasonable. You walk along a quiet British street where hedges are trimmed and curtains are drawn just so, and at the end of the road there is a building that looks, at first glance, like any other respectable institution: solid brick, high windows, a brass plate polished to a discreet shine. It might be a school, a convent, a hospital, or a charity home. The letters on the plaque use words that comfort the public and disarm suspicion. Refuge, care, rehabilitation, reform, rescue. Behind you, the air of the ordinary world feels thin, fragile, as if it could be torn away with the closing of a single door. The woman who opens that door is not a monster. She could be a senior nurse, a matron, a devout volunteer, her hair tied back, her expression composed, and the first thing she does is lower her voice, as though the real crime would be for the neighbors to hear your name. You step into a corridor that smells of soap, boiled, food and carbolic, the holy trinity of institutional cleanliness, and the sound of the latch sliding home behind you is soft but final. This is how secret institutions in Britain began their work, not with whips cracking in public squares, but with paperwork, quiet agreements, and a culture that had already decided what sort of woman you were. In an office at the side, a clerk or sister sits behind a desk and opens a ledger. The book is ruled into patient, resident, or penitent. The labels change, but the function is the same. On those pages, your life will be condensed into a few lines: name, age, marital status, religion, occupation, diagnosis, or offense. The category might read unmarried mother, moral defective, feeble-minded, melancholic, incorrigible, hysterical, alcoholic, wayward. Your story has been sifted on its way here, all the complexity of your choices, pressures, hopes, and fears reduced to a problem that needs to be contained. The law has not always spoken in the brutal simplicity of unworthy, yet the social machinery around that law has done the job for it. Families, priests, doctors, and magistrates have all learned a shared vocabulary for women who do not fit. Your father, who could not bear the thought of the neighbors whispering about your pregnancy. Your husband, who discovered that if he described you as unstable or dangerous, a doctor would listen to him more seriously than to you. The priest who told your mother that sending you away was an act of tough love. Each of them may tell themselves that this is mercy, that this is a chance for you to become someone new. But under all the talk of protection and reform sits a simpler aim: to remove the disruption you represent from the fragile stage set of respectability. These institutions took many forms: Magdalene laundries hidden behind chapels, mother and baby homes set in countryside that spoke of fresh air and moral cleanliness, asylums on the edges of towns, workhouse wards devoted to girls who had fallen, rescue homes that promised to lift you from vice, each with its own rules, uniforms and rituals, but all sharing the same core belief that certain women, by virtue of poverty, sexuality, mental distress, or simple disobedience, were too dangerous or embarrassing to be allowed to move freely through ordinary streets. It was not enough to punish them for specific acts. They had to be rewritten as the type of women from whom nothing better could be expected. Once that reclassification had happened, once your name had been entered into the ledger under one of those headings, the institution did not just claim your present. It reached greedily into your past and future as, well, memories that did not fit the category were shrugged off as unreliable. Hopes that extended beyond the gate were discouraged as unrealistic. You were no longer a daughter who read poetry, a seamstress who loved to sing, a clerk who wanted to travel. You became, in official eyes, a moral lesson, a case, a burden, a warning, a person whose suffering could be described in reports without anyone asking you how it felt from inside your own skin. Once you are inside, the process of erasure does not begin with violence. It begins with routine. Your day is no longer yours. It belongs to the bell, the whistle, or the footsteps of the matron in the corridor. You rise at a set time, wash at a set sink, sit in a dining hall where the clatter of enamel dishes drowns out any attempt at conversation not sanctioned by the rules. Your clothes are taken, inspected, sometimes burned, sometimes stored in case you prove yourself worthy of wearing anything that is not standard issue again. In their place, you are given garments that flatten difference: grey dress, starched apron, shapeless nightgown. Your hair may be cut, your jewelry confiscated, mirrors removed or rationed. Every one of these small acts sends the same message, that the individual you arrived as is being dissolved. For your own good, you are told, so that you will no longer be tempted by vanity, sin, or delusion. The work begins as soon as you can stand. In laundries powered by unpaid women's labor, you haul heavy baskets of other people's dirty clothes. Your hands raw from lye, your back aching, the steam turning the room into a blurred world where faces disappear into clouds. In kitchens, you scrub pans and peel endless vegetables. In sewing rooms, you mend sheets and garments for institutions and customers who will never know who stitched the seams. Each stitch is a quiet line of text in a story no one will bother to read. In asylums, work is prescribed as therapeutic, something that will discipline your unruly mind and body. In religious homes, the toil is penance, proof that you repent. Prayers are threaded between tasks like barbed wire threaded through hedges, a constant reminder that your suffering is both deserved and necessary. The staff are not always cruel caricatures. Some are weary, underpaid, trapped in their own way by vows or limited options, but they are trained to see you first through the lens of the file. The labels at the top of your case notes shape every interaction. If you speak calmly about what brought you here, your words may be recorded as rationalization. If you cry, they become evidence of instability. If you grow angry, they are proof of violent tendencies. You learn, slowly and painfully, that honesty is a luxury you cannot afford, that survival here depends on performing the version of yourself that the institution wants to see, grateful, subdued, reformed. This is another layer of erasure. Not only are you removed from your old life, you are forced to play a role in the story being written about you. Within mother and baby homes, the cruelty takes on an additional edge. Your body is scrutinized at the same time as it is shamed. Staff supervise your feeding of the child. They watch the way you hold it, judge whether your tears are appropriate or excessive, and always, somewhere out of sight, decisions are being made about whether this baby will be allowed to remain yours. The language used in those rooms is soft, careful, professional, discussions of best interests and prospects, of opportunities and stability. But inside the phrases sits a blunt fact that your moral and social status has already been deemed insufficient, that there are couples on waiting lists whose claims to the child will be treated as superior to yours. By the time the adoption papers are placed in front of you, you have been weakened by exhaustion, grief, and weeks or months of being told that wanting to keep your baby is selfish. You sign with a hand that shakes, and somewhere in an office the document is filed as evidence of your consent. Years later, when you speak of coercion, you will be told that nobody forced you. The ink on the page will speak louder than the pressure that brought it into being. In asylums, the instruments of control dress themselves in scientific language. Your admission is justified by diagnoses that rest on still developing theories. Hysteria, neurasthenia, moral insanity, depressive psychosis, phrases that sound authoritative and precise, but are often little more than reflections of what society finds intolerable in you, being too outspoken, too sexual, too resistant to a husband's wishes, too broken by bereavement. Once those words have been pinned to you, they attach to everything you do. Medication, seclusion, restraints, or more invasive procedures are recorded as treatment, and if they fail to make you compliant, the failure is attributed to the depth of your disorder, not to the brutality of the care. At each stage, your own account of your mind and life is pushed further towards the edge of the page, until you begin to doubt it yourself. Outside the high walls and locked doors, the society that sent you here is busy tidying up the narrative of your absence. Your family, neighbors, and former employers adjust their speech with a speed that would be impressive if it were not so devastating. Some tell half-truths, that you have gone into service somewhere distant, that you are recovering from an illness, that you needed a rest. Others lean into the stigma, hinting darkly that you brought your fate on yourself, that you fell in with the wrong crowd, that you were not right in the head. Over time, these explanations harden into memory. Even people who once knew you well start to recall you as more reckless, more fragile, more troublesome than you were, because it is easier to live alongside an institution if you can convince yourself that the women inside really are different, really are the kind of people who cannot be allowed to move freely. This is how erasure works in the long term, not just by locking bodies away, but by rewriting the attitudes of those who remain outside. Your letters, if you are permitted to write any, pass through the hands of staff who decide whether to send them, edit them, or quietly drop them into a drawer. Sometimes you are told that no one has written back, when in truth no letter was ever posted. Sometimes your family is told you are better off not receiving visitors, that seeing you would only unsettle you, and so the bonds that might have anchored you to the world fray and snap. When, after years of such separation, governments or churches quietly change policies, when funding dries up or scandals leak into the press, these institutions do not usually end with dramatic confrontations. More often they are wound down, merged, renamed, repurposed. One ward closed here, another converted there. A mother and baby home becomes a conference center. A laundry is turned into student flats, an asylum into luxury apartments whose promotional brochures boast of heritage features, without ever explaining precisely whose heritage is being preserved. The archive, where it exists, is partial and problematic. Boxes of admission registers, inspection reports and correspondence stacked in basements or local record offices. Sometimes scholars and survivors gain access. Sometimes files have been weeded in earlier decades to protect reputations. In these documents, your presence is reduced to a line of ink. Date of entry, age, origin, religion, diagnosis or moral status, an outcome column that may read discharged, transferred, emigrated, deceased. Nothing in that neat grid captures the texture of your days, the taste of institutional porridge, the sting of carbolic on cracked skin, the way you repeated your own name at night so you would not forget it. Historians of dark history now spend years piecing together fragments that escape the official record, testimony from women who left and later found the courage or rage to speak, hints in family stories, odd absences in genealogies, photographs where a figure has been literally cut out. In Ireland, England, Scotland and Wales, campaigns by former residents have forced governments and churches to acknowledge what happened in some of these places. Apologies have been made, schemes of compensation set up, yet even these partial reckonings reveal the scale of what has been lost. For every woman who stands up to tell her story, there are countless others who died inside or shortly after leaving, never having had their experience recorded in their own words. For every institution whose name becomes notorious, there are smaller ones that slip through the cracks. Privately run homes, local initiatives, short-lived experiments in social control that left behind no more than a line or two in a municipal minute book. Viewers clicking on a modern documentary or video about secret institutions that erased unworthy women are often shocked by the sheer normality with which the harm was done. The accents in old recordings are polite. The paperwork is precise. The photographs show tidy courtyards and rows of well-made beds. It is not the imagery of overt terror they have been taught to associate with atrocity, and that is precisely what troubles them. The realization that cruelty can wear the mask of order, that an entire country can look away from the suffering of its own people, not because it does not know, but because it has agreed, at some deep level, that those people's pain does not matter as much as the comfort of everyone else. In the end, the phrase unworthy women tells you more about the society that coined it than about the women themselves. Worth in this context is measured not by kindness, intelligence, resilience, or creativity, but by usefulness to a narrow vision of order. A worthy woman is one who fits her assigned roles without protest, as daughter, wife, mother, servant, worker, patient, parishioner. Her desires must not disrupt, her grief must not embarrass, her anger must not challenge. When she fails in any of these tasks, or when misfortune befalls her in a way that cannot be conveniently hidden, the quickest way to restore the illusion of harmony is to remove her, to hand her over to a building where walls and routines can absorb the scandal she represents. The secret institutions that erased so many did so with the cooperation of hundreds of apparently ordinary people, those who signed forms, rang bells, scrubbed floors, wrote reports, nodded in church, voted in elections, all the while telling themselves that this was necessary, that without such measures, society would collapse into chaos. Facing this truth is uncomfortable because it presses a mirror up to the present, forcing us to ask who is being framed as unworthy now, who finds their accounts of harm doubted, who is more likely to have their children removed, who is more likely to be sectioned, detained, deported, quietly disappeared into systems we do not bother to understand. It is easy to point at the past and marvel at its ignorance, its piety, its sexism, its class cruelty. It is harder to recognize the same patterns dressed in modern language, in risk assessments, safeguarding procedures, welfare reforms and immigration policies. The lesson of these histories is not that Britain was uniquely monstrous, but that any society that values order over justice, reputation over truth, and the feelings of the comfortable over the lives of the vulnerable will tend, sooner or later, to build places like this, places that allow respectable people to look away, while the work of breaking and remaking human beings is done out of sight. The women who passed through those doors did not vanish completely. They left traces in stone, paper and blood, the crosses they carved into walls, the petitions they smuggled out, the awkward questions their grandchildren later asked when they discovered a missing branch on the family tree. Every time their stories are told with care, every time we choose to center their perspective rather than the soothing explanations of those who can find them, another small piece of the erasure is undone. If there is a final image that lingers after the credits roll, It is not of the buildings themselves, but of a single woman standing at a gate, suitcase in hand, knowing that once she steps back into the world, it will not quite know what to do with her. You imagine saying to her that she was never unworthy, that the shame belongs not to her, but to the system that swallowed her. And perhaps the point of listening now is to make sure that when our own age is examined by future eyes, there are fewer such gates, fewer ledgers full of quietly condemned names, fewer institutions that can only be described honestly once they are safely in the past. History cannot give those women back their years, their children, or their choices, but it can refuse, at last, to let the silence that surrounded them be the final word.